Okay, so we began last time the story of Eliyahu and the widow. So let's just review what we saw. We'll just read because it's been a few weeks, so we'll read quickly the story again and remind ourselves of what we had already discussed. So again, this is after Eliyahu was forced to leave Crete, where he was fed by the ravens and drank from the wadi that was there because the wadi dried up. Why did the wadi dry up? Because there was no rain. Why was there no rain? We know because Eliyahu decided that there shouldn't be any rain. Now, the sort of the problem that we have is that Eliyahu needs a new place to reside where Hashem will provide him sustenance. So reading again from Pasuk Chet, Vayi dvar Adonai elav lemor, and the word of the Lord came to him. Kum lech tzorfat asher letzidon v'yashavta sham. Go at once to Tzorfat of Sidon and stay there. I've designated a widow there to feed you. When he spoke about last time, that this is parallel to his earlier statement, which was Lech mizeu fanita lecha kedma, v'nistarta benachal Krita asher al pnei ha'Yarden, v'yan me'anachal tishteh v'et arvim tziviti lechalkelcha sham. So earlier Hashem told him to go to the Nachal Crete, the Wadi of Crete, and there he would be hiding, right there he would be secluded from people. In this case, he's not exactly, he's still going to be far away, way up north by Sidon, which is in what's modern day called Lebanon, but he's not going to be completely secluded for people. He's going to be living amongst people. And the other parallel is that just like here it says, the ravens I've commanded to feed you, so to here it says, I've commanded the widow to feed you. Okay. Now we'll see that this command is not so simple as the command to the ravens. In other words, the command to the ravens, Hashem commanded that the ravens would bring him food, and that's what the ravens did. They took from wherever they took food, and they brought it to Eliyahu. But this commandment to the widow to feed Eliyahu was not so obvious, and certainly she had no notion of her role here until Eliyahu told her about it. So this is going to be sort of the problem of the story. Also, an interesting that we spoke about is that here it says, "Vayame anachal tishteh." You will drink from the wadi, and the ravens are supposed to bring him food. Here it just says that the widow will bring him food. It doesn't say anything about water. So where is Eliyahu going to get his water from? So we spoke about last time. Apparently he will get the water from wherever everybody else there is getting the water from. And the miracle, so to speak, that's only regarding food. And we spoke about this idea in general, that we see that Hashem does not want to make a miracle regarding the water. Hashem is only making miracles for Eliyahu regarding food, not regarding the water. Why? Because the water is what Eliyahu acted upon, that there will be no water until he says so. So sort of regarding the water, Eliyahu has to deal with the natural effects of what he has caused. And with regarding to the food, that's where there's room for miracles to occur. Okay, so now let's see what happens further. So, ויקום וילך צרפתה, ויבוא אל פתח העיר, והנה שם אישה אלמנה מקוששת עצים, ויקרא אליה ויאמר, קחי נא לי מעט מים בכלי ואשתה. So Eliyahu indeed goes to Tzorfat, and Tzorfat is up in Lebanon near Sidon, not where Tzorfat, modern day Tzorfat, where Felipe here is joining us from. And he sees there this widow gathering wood. And Eliyahu understands that this is similar to other cases like this in Tanakh, like when Eliezer went to search a woman for Rivka, or Yaakov, when he went and he saw Rachel, that, he sort of meets the woman and he realizes that, this is his destiny. Not like in those cases, destiny for marriage, but in this case, he understands that this apparently is the woman, the widow that Hashem has designated to feed him. So he calls out to her. So he called out to her, bring me a little water in your pitcher and let me drink. And she went to fetch it. He called out to her, please bring along a piece of bread for me. Okay, now why did Eliyahu do it in 2 stages? Why did he first ask for a little bit of water, and then he asked for bread? The idea is, we might have discussed it last time, I'm not sure.
I don't understand.
So apparently, when you want to ask something, you don't jump right away to your big request, right? You first start out with a smaller request, and then you slowly escalate the request, right? So he starts out with a more smaller request, bring me some water, and I will drink. And that request is actually apparently going to be granted because she sees her turning around to bring him that water. In other words, the first request, she's willing to grant it. So now Eliyahu is upping the request and also asking something which is more demanding, and that is also bread, not just water, but also bread. Okay.
Is this based on a Perush?
What I just said now?
Yes, this one.
Everything I'm saying is based on
the book. Okay.
On the book of Rav Elchanan Samet. Does he quote it from one of the Mefarshim?
I don't know, because if I think like Al Pi Svara, I would say water is more essential, is more necessary. When you are thirsty or hungry, the first thing that you need is drinking, because you can survive without eating maybe longer. So first you need water to sustain yourself.
Right. Also from that perspective, Rav Samet actually quotes this Perush from the Al Sheikh. Maybe I'll see if I can show it to you inside. 1 second. Check. Here. Let me show it to you in the Al Sheikh. He explains it this way. It says here, הנה ציוויתי שם אין למנה לפקדיך, אז ויקום מלך צרפת יבוא אל פתח העיר, והנה לפניו מקושש ביצים. He sees before him this woman gathering wood. אז נתן אל ליבו, כי זאת האישה אשר הוכיח השם לקלקלו. That's why Eliyahu thought to himself that this is the woman that Hashem has designated to feed him. ויעש גם הוא כהנו כותי דידו למי ששואל העני בצל, ובנותנם אליו אמר, שואל העני בצל, ובנם אליו אמר בץ לה בלא פיתה נסיב ליבה. ככה בוש אליהו להתחיל בשאלת לחם, כי היה יקר בימים ההם, על כן התחיל במים לשתות, וגם זה מעט. In other words, he brings here an example of an expression like the people who ask first for the onion, and then they say, you give them the onion, and say, well, I can't really have the onion without bread. Okay? So Eliyahu, it's like you ask for a cup of tea, and then you say, well, where's the mizonot, the cake to go along with the cup of tea as well. So he says also Eliyahu was embarrassed to first ask for bread because that was more expensive and as we will see, indeed hard to come by in those days. So he started first with the water. וכאשר בתלך לקח את המים ויקרא אליה ויאמר לקחינה לי בת לחם בידך. כלומר מים בלא לחם תחילה נסיב ליבה. כן, התחיל לי אתה תחילת בת לחם בידך קודם שאשתה. In other words, he's saying, I'm going to drink without having any food to go along with it. That's sort of the justification after he saw the answer to the water was positive to go further and ask for bread. Okay, it didn't go so well though, because now we have the very shocking answer of the almanah. She responds to him, ותאמר, חי אדוני אלוהיך, אם יש לי מאוד, כי אם אלוך קמח בקד ומעט שמן בצפחת, והנני מקוששת 2 עצים ובאתי ועשיתיהו לי, ולבני ואכלונו ומתנו. As the Lord your God lives, she replied, I have nothing baked, nothing but a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug, and just gathering a couple of sticks so that I can go home and prepare it for me and my son. we shall eat it, and then we shall die. Unbelievable. Why is this unbelievable? Because again, Eliyahu, when he's approaching the widow, again, all Hashem told him was that I've designated a widow to feed you. Okay? So you would think, who is this widow? It must be some rich widow or somebody that has the means to feed Eliyahu. And Eliyahu seems to have stumbled upon the widow. He believes this is the one. But then when he asks her for bread, she says, all I have is just a very small amount, which is going to be the last meal of me and my son. And afterwards, that's it. We have no food left and we're going to die. So how is she supposed to feed Eliyahu? Okay, this is this is the problem. Okay, what's Eliyahu supposed to do now? Okay, so let's see what Eliyahu responds. So Eliyahu has to figure out a solution. Again, Hashem didn't tell him any of this. All Hashem told him was, but he doesn't say how she's going to provide for him. And when Eliyahu thinks that this is the woman, but then turns out she doesn't have the means even to provide for herself, certainly not for Eliyahu. So what is Eliyahu's solution? Eliyahu says, "Vayomer Eliyahu al tir'i, bo yasichi dvarech, achasi li misha muga ktana v'rishona, v'otzet li velach v'livnech ta'asi b'achona." Don't be afraid, said Elijah to her. Go and do as you have said, but first make me a small cake from what you have there, and bring it out to me, and then make some for yourself and your son. Okay, so Eliyahu said to her, and this is a bit of a test to her, right? Because really, she doesn't have enough food for herself or her son. She certainly shouldn't be handing out of it to strangers, right? We spoke about this, the halakha. Anybody remember? If let's say you're walking in the desert and you only have a little bit of water for yourself, and there's somebody else along with you, and if you give him from the water, you will both die, or you keep it to yourself. What's the halakha? Anybody remember? We spoke about that.
Yes, you keep it, you drink it yourself.
You drink it and you hope you'll find a yishuv where you'll find water for the other person as well.
Right. Eve, what did you say?
I said the same, that you drink it for yourself first.
Right, that was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said, "Chayecha kodmim lechayecha vercha." Your life comes before the life of somebody else. So she's not supposed to give out according to halakha, according to Rabbi Akiva. So Eliyahu is...
Sorry, Diane, isn't there also the rider that midah chasidut is to give to the other person to drink? And I remember I questioned it that time last week. I don't want to go into it now, the last shiur.
Two opinions in the Gemara. According to Ben Bav, I think it was there, he says you should split it up and then both die. But Rabbi Akiva says, no, chayecha kodmim lechayecha vercha. There's no midat chasidut when to give up your own life.
Right.
I don't think.
I think what you mean with midas chasidut is Pirkei Avot, but it's saying
no. I learned it long time ago. I could be a bit muddled, but the Dayan is always right. But there is an option that to be like the Chassid, then you would give it to the other person. But the Dayan is quite right. Your life takes precedence over somebody else's. Yes.
All right. I don't think I'm always right, but anyway.
No, but
Anyway, here though, Eliyahu, so it's a test to her, a test of belief that Eliyahu is promised her a miracle. So you have to believe, that this is not a standard case, and Hashem is really going to do the miracle. But again, Eliyahu's understanding. What's Eliyahu's understanding here? Eliyahu's understanding is that since Hashem promised that the widow would feed him, and he believes that this is the widow, and clearly she doesn't have by natural means the way to feed, the way to provide for him. So it must occur in a miraculous way. That's why Eliyahu believes that Hashem will make this miracle. This is Eliyahu's understanding. Now, why does she first have to give to Eliyahu? Why does he insist? Why does she first have to make the first bake for Eliyahu, and only then she and her son can eat? Why
Because
does it have to be that?
Hashem works in teva, in nature, that you have, Hashem helps those who help themselves. She has to be the first one. She has to initiate it.
Yeah, she has to initiate. I agree with you. But why does she have to give to Eliyahu first?
To show that she's willing, that they, you know, that she has faith, that she has emunah. That
Right. Because again, the miracle is not occurring for her. In other words, she's going to be benefiting from this miracle. Okay, which is interesting. Why we even need her, but we'll discuss that soon. But it's clear that this miracle is not occurring on her behalf. It's occurring on Eliyahu's behalf. Right? He's the prophet. He's the one that Hashem does miracles for, not just some widow, some unknown widow. Okay? So therefore, it must be clear that she's giving first to Eliyahu. And by that, she also becomes entitled to benefit for it. And she can also feed off this miracle. Okay, but Eliyahu has to be the one to receive first. Because again, the miracle is being done on behalf of Eliyahu. And now Eliyahu says it. Ki כה אמר אדוני אלוהי ישראל, כד הקמח לא תכלה, וצפחת השמן לא תחסר, עד יום תת אדוני גשם על פני אדמה. For thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not give out, and the jug of oil shall not fail until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the ground. Now again, Hashem didn't really say this, right? We don't have it anywhere that Hashem actually said these words. So how is Eliyahu saying, Ki כה אמר Hashem? Okay? In other words, the כה אמר, yeah. So I think the כה אמר Hashem here, this is how Eliyahu understands. In other words, when Hashem said, וציוויתי שם אישה אלמנה לכלכלך, and now facing this widow and facing this situation, that all she has is this jar of flour and jug of oil, then he realizes, he understands that this is how Hashem has commanded the miracle to occur. Through this jar of flour and jug of oil, it will last. Okay, and that's Eliyahu reading into the sort of general statement of Hashem of ציוויתי שם אישה אלמנה לכלכלך. Okay, ותלך ותעש כדבר אליהו, ותאכל היא והוא ואיתה ימים. She went and did as Eliyahu had spoken, and she and her household had food. Again, not for a long time. Again, I object to this translation. What did we say yamim means?
days.
1 year.
1 year, correct. Yamim, as we see in many places in Tanakh, it means 1 year. So to here, which will be apparent also from the next story, which happened in the 3rd year. So again, Eliyahu had 1 year in Nachal Krit, 2nd year here with the widow. And indeed, as Eliyahu promised, כד הקמח לא חלתה, וצפחת השמן לא חסר, כי דבר אדוני אשר דיבר ביד אליהו, the jar of flour did not give out, nor did the jug of oil fail, just as the Lord had spoken through Elijah. Okay, now what we have to ask ourselves is, what is the purpose of this whole story? Okay, again, the general purpose of this story is to find a way for Eliyahu to survive during the drought that he brought upon himself. But why is it happening in this very peculiar way? You know, it's a widow who doesn't have for herself. She tells him, she refuses his request, and then he tells her this miracle is going to happen. Why is it all being arranged this way? What is the purpose of all this? Any ideas? Again, we're looking for ideas that can be supported also from the
I've got an idea.
Okay.
It shows a lot of dependence. I mean, the whole country, the whole people, everyone is depending now on rain, on Eliyahu. And to give Eliyahu the feeling of what it means to be completely helpless and dependent on others. Maybe
Yes,
it's the desperate situation that people are in.
Excellent, very good. Felipe, also you wanted to say something?
אמונה וביטחון?
Yes. But why specifically in this way? You're right. He needs emunah and bitachon also for her. But why specifically in this way?
But exactly like Auchan said before, first she has to give to make it happen. So Eliyahu is in between.
Right. Okay, so from her perspective, it's certainly an issue of emunah, right? She has to believe that it will work and believe in Eliyahu. And she does her part, right? She shows the belief. we have to ask ourselves, though, from the perspective of Eliyahu, and I think Daniel is right on that point. And again, we'll dig into it a little bit. But if we compare, this story of Eliyahu with the Almanah to the previous story of Eliyahu with the Wadi and the Ovim, they're exactly the opposite. Why? In the first year, Eliyahu was sent away from people. Okay, Hashem distanced him from the people. In other words, you brought the suffering on everybody. So Eliyahu was cast off from society. So he was living alone, and he had these ravens bringing food. So the test to Eliyahu in the first year was that he will be distanced from society, and he will have his food brought to him by the ravens. And again, we said, sort of the test there was Eliyahu is being brought lechem ubasar. He's being brought bread and meat. So he has a good catering. Okay, two meaty meals a day. Very nice. Okay. And on the other hand, how is it brought to him? It's being brought by these ravens who are stealing food from other people, from seemingly, right? Because the ravens are not known to have their own shechita houses and everything that needs to be done and bakeries. Okay, so the ravens are clearly taking this lechem ubasar, this bread and meat from people, and Eliyahu is living at that expense. So the test to Eliyahu, is he willing to live in this fashion away from society and at the expense of society? Okay, that didn't work, or it didn't completely work, because Eliyahu seemed to be willing to continue to live in that way. In other words, Eliyahu didn't say to Hashem, okay, I give up, let's go back and give the rain. Eliyahu stayed there. So now in the second year, the test to Eliyahu is different. Instead of being away from society, he's going to come into society, and he's going to face the suffering of the people. So he's brought encounter with a widow, with a small child, which is like the weakest link in society, right? Isha almanah with a small child. She has nobody to protect her, nobody to work for her. She's like the weakest part of society. And Eliyahu is going to encounter her suffering, right? And that's the response that she gives to him, that she has like one food for one last meal, and then they're going to die. And he's going to have to live that lifestyle, okay? In other words, Eliyahu is no longer going to have his 2 meals a day with lechem ubasar. He has this flour and oil, but that's it. It's just flour and oil every day. Flour and oil, that's all they have. So even though he has this miracle, which provides some stability, he's certainly being downgraded, you could say, as opposed to his previous sustenance. But now he's going to have a very minimal sustenance, and he's going to live, although perpetually, but he's going to live at the same status as this widow is living. Okay, so that's sort of so from that perspective, we can certainly understand what's going on here, that Eliyahu is sort of being faced, now instead of putting him away from society, now he's going to be put back in society, and he's going to be confronted with the harsh reality of the drought. Okay, now we can see that the psukim actually point this to us. It's not just an interpretation, but we can see this in the verses themselves, because if we look at the statement of the widow to Eliyahu, she says, "V'tomer chai Hashem Elokecha, im yesh li ma'od ki im lo chaf kemach bakad u'me'at tzapa shemen betzapachat." Now, does anybody know, or can anybody think of this expression, "Chai Hashem Elokecha im yesh li ma'od ki im"? Where have we had this expression already?
In which verse is this, Diane?
I'm in verse number 12, Pasuk Yudbet. In Melachim Aleph Perek Yuzayin, Kings 1, chapter 17. This expression of Chai Hashem, Im, and Ki'im, we had it already in this Perek, in this chapter. Anybody remember where?
It was with Ovadia. I don't know if it was with...
No, earlier, not Ovadia's later on. If you go back to the first verse in the chapter, when Eliyahu takes his oath, okay, that there will be no rain. So take a look at the language. He says, "Vayomer Eliyahu hatishbi mitoshavei Gilad el Achav, Chai Adonai Elohei Yisrael asher amadti lefanav, im yiyeh hashanim ha'ele tal u'matar, ki im lefi devari." So we have the expression Chai Hashem Elokei Yisrael here, or there Elokecha, which is a language of an oath. Okay, as the Lord lives, he takes an oath in the life of the Lord. Im is a condition. If there will be rain these years, ki'im, except for at my word, except at my bidding. So the expression of Chai Hashem im ki'im appears in the oath of Eliyahu. And the widow uses the same terminology when she's denying Eliyahu his request for bread. She doesn't just simply say, well, look, I don't have enough to give you, right? She uses the same type of poetic oath language that Eliyahu used, and she declares, V'tomer, Chai Hashem Elokecha, okay, again, the language of the oath. Again, she uses the word Elokecha, your God, right? Because apparently she understands, even though she probably doesn't know exactly the identity of Eliyahu, she doesn't at least realize that this is a man of God before her. So she uses the expression as your Lord. And she uses im yesh li ma'og, again, the expression im, if I have ma'og, something baked, in other words, which means I don't have anything baked. Ki'im, except for melokas kemach bakad u'me'at shemat shemen b'tzapachat. That's all I have. So again, it's the same type of expression that Eliyahu used in his oath. Okay. Now, why is the wording similar? So apparently, the wording is similar. I'm not saying that necessarily she was aware that of this when she was saying it, but certainly the way it's presented in the Tanakh, this statement actually turns out it's not just denying Eliyahu his request for bread, it's actually accusing him. In other words, the reason all I have is this small amount of flour in the jug of oil is because of your oath. Okay? In other words, the reason why it has the same language of an oath, the same type of structure of the statement, is really because it's an accusation to Eliyahu. You stopped the rain with your oath, and the result is that now all I have is just this last meal for me and my son. Again, I'm not saying that the widow knew that she was actually saying this, but certainly when Eliyahu hears these words, and especially when they're phrased in this way, Eliyahu understands this as an accusation towards him, that he's responsible for the dire strait situation of the widow and her son. Okay, now let's see how Eliyahu responds to this. This is very interesting. Okay, so first of all, Eliyahu says, "V'yomer Eliyahu al tir'i, bo yisichi dvarech." So we see that Eliyahu has compassion to her, right? He understands her plight and he realizes, that she's correct. So the first thing he says to her, "Al tir'i," do not be afraid. So he shows compassion to her, and he tells her, "Don't be afraid. You think you're on the verge of death. Do not be afraid." And then he says to her, "Bo yasichi dvarech," go and do as you have said. In other words, he doesn't want to startle her too much. He's not saying, no, don't make for you and your son, make for me. He's saying, don't be afraid. Do as you have said that you need to prepare for you and your son. All I'm asking is just to give me just a tad, just a little bit. Okay? And this is the really interesting one. He says to her in his promise, "Ki cho amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael, kad hakemach lo tichle, v'tzapachat Hashem lo tichsav, ad yom tet Adonai geshem al pnei ha'adama." Okay? Why is Eliyahu adding here that the flour and the oil will last until the day that Hashem brings rain upon the ground? Why is Eliyahu adding? He could have just stopped here. He could have said, "The jar of flour shall not give out, and the jug of oil shall not fail." Why does he add, "Ad yom tet Adonai geshem al pnei ha'adama," until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the ground? Why does he add that?
Because she's been accusing him of, he was the one who stopped it. So he's saying to her, he's obviously recognizing that she's accusing him. And so he's trying to assure her, I think.
Exactly. He recognizes that all this miracle is needed is because of the lack of rain, which he's responsible for, which again is the implicit accusation in her words. So therefore he says, now we will have this miracle. Ad yom tet Hashem geshem al pnei ha'adama. Okay. Now, what's also very interesting about this wording? Who is going to give the rain?
He is.
Who is?
I think it's Eliyahu. I can't
Well,
find
Eliyahu
it.
does
Eliyahu's
the verse say?
but the truth is that it's in Eliyahu's hands, isn't it?
Yeah, because he has
You
the
would
key
think
of the
so,
king.
but who does Eliyahu say? It's in the hands of
Hashem, Tehi Hashem Geshem al
Hashem.
Pnei Adama.
Hashem. Right. This is very
Cool.
different from what we had in Pasuk Aleph. Pasuk Aleph,
Yeah.
Eliyahu said, it's only at my decision that there will be rain. Okay? Eliyahu is changing his tone here. Ad yom tet Hashem Geshem al Pnei Adama. Okay, Eliyahu is putting it back in the hands of Hashem until the day that Hashem decides to give rain. Okay, so we see that Eliyahu facing this widow, again, not that she doesn't necessarily understand everything that's being said here, but there's a deeper conversation going on, which is really between Eliyahu and Hashem, because Hashem is the one that put Eliyahu in this situation to face this widow. Okay, so Eliyahu, we see that he's beginning to tone down his statements, and now he's saying until the day that Hashem will give rain on the ground. Okay, so he's putting it back in the hands of Hashem, the key to the rain. Okay, and we will see that's what ultimately happens, because the rain comes with ultimately Hashem says to Eliyahu in the next chapter, I've now decided to give rain. Okay, but the point is Eliyahu has to recognize that as well. And here we see this first break in Eliyahu that he's beginning to recognize that. Okay, additional layer that we can add here in this verse is Ad Yom Tet Hashem Geshem al Pnei Adama. This is something that Rav Samit points out. There's also a bit of a prayer here in the statement of Eliyahu. When you use this type of expression, until the day that Hashem will give rain again on the ground, you're also sort of hinting that you're hoping for that day. Okay, this will even happen until the day. Until the day means that you're hoping for that day. You're anticipating that day. So there's also a bit of an implicit prayer here in Eliyahu that he hopes to reach that day where Hashem will give rain. Okay, so again we see this sort of Eliyahu is not as strict as he was previously. He's not saying the rain is my decision. He's saying it's in the hands of Hashem, and he seems to be a bit hoping for that rain to come. Okay. Now, very interesting. We have a very interesting phenomenon here in Pasuk Tedvav as well, in verse 15. And that is V'telech v'ta'aseh kedvar Eliyahu v'tochal hi vehu veita yamin. So we have here a phenomenon which is called Kri Uchtiv, okay, where the verse is written one way, but it's read differently. So the way it's written is V'tochal hu vehi, but it's read V'tochal hi vahu. So the way it's written is that who ate, he ate, and she ate, and her house. But the way it's read is that she and he, in other words, she is before him. Okay. Now, what is this meaning of this sort of double reading that we have here? Anybody have any ideas, suggestions as to why this is so?
Wouldn't it be just nice that she would eat first anyway? It's derech nimos, it's manners that she should eat first.
Right. Although you're right, it usually should be ladies first. Although actually, Eliyahu said that he needs to be fed first, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's going on here?
But she wanted to eat first. She did say, wasn't it? That was her problem. She said, I've just about got enough of myself and my child. And he was assuring her, don't worry. So I suppose in a way he's telling her, look, she's eating first.
So there's a very interesting midrash on this. Let me show it to you. Second, here, let me show it to you. It appears in Shira Shirim Rabbah. It says here as follows. Rabbi Yehuda ורב סימון אמר, וכי משלחת, ולא היא והוא משלו אכלו. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda ורב סימון says, really, it should be him first, right? Not her. Why? because they weren't eating from what she had, right? Who's the real balabait here, right? If they would have to say, when you have a meal, right, you always have to say a blessing to the owner of the meal, the one who provided the food. Who provided the food in this situation? It wasn't her, right? She didn't have enough food to last her for a year. Eliyahu, through the miracle, was the one providing the food. So really should be him first, not her. Like the ktiv. The ktiv is v'tochal hu vehi, that he ate and she ate, right? V'tochal hi vehu, mishelo achlu, dichtiv v'tochal hi vehu, hu vehi ktiv. So why do we read it hi vehu? Why do we read it she's before him? אלא על ידי שקיבלה אותו בסבר פנים יפות ושימשתו, זכתה להחיות את בנה. Rather, because this widow greeted Eliyahu and took care of him and served him, she was rewarded as well. So we have here a double meaning in the verse. On the one hand, it should be Eliyahu is first before her, right? Because all this miracle is really happening because of Eliyahu. But on the other hand, the verse also recognizes her role in the matter, right? That she was willing, she put faith in Eliyahu, and she was willing to serve Eliyahu. And from that regard, she is sort of coming before Eliyahu, okay? I think this fits in well with what we're trying to say, because there's sort of a double meaning here in the story. On the one hand, the purpose of the story is to find a way to feed Eliyahu. But it's not by coincidence that it's happening in this specific way, that Eliyahu actually ends up feeding the widow as well. Why? Because Eliyahu, again, the purpose of the story is to put Eliyahu face to face with the consequences of the drought and to make him more compassionate towards that. So how is he made more compassionate towards that? He's made more compassionate towards that, first of all, by first facing the troubles of the widow, and then forcing to find a solution which will not only care for himself, but also will care for her and the son. And that's what Eliyahu does, right? He doesn't just say, okay, I'll take the jar and jug. He realizes that it can't happen without her, right? Because that's what Hashem said. It won't work if he just takes her jug and flour. It has to work together with her. So on the one hand, it's being done for Eliyahu, but it's also being done for her as a way to teach Eliyahu, you should be compassionate and you should care for this. Okay? Now this very interesting. This will lead us to the next story that we have in the chapter. We won't have time to study it now, but let's just see briefly. The continuation of the chapter is, as we'll read from verse 17 onwards, is ויהי אחר הדברים האלה חלה בן האישה בעלת הבית, ויהי חוליו חזק מאוד עד אשר לא נותרה בו נשמה. After a while, the son of the mistress of the house fell sick, and his illness grew until he had no breath left in him. And the whole continuation here of this story is Eliyahu trying to resuscitate her son, okay? And there's a whole story. She blamed him for it, and he tried to resuscitate the son. First was unable to, then he prayed again, and then Hashem restored the life of the child. Okay, so this whole story, we will have to analyze very much in detail, what's going on here, what exactly happened. But just on the surface level, we can say that this is sort of a continuation, again, because the story itself seems to be very startling. I mean, what does this have to do with anything? The first two stories, fine, we understand. Eliyahu needs to find a way to survive, so he'll get fed by the ravens. Now he'll get fed by this widow. But now we have this own personal problem of this woman that her son dies, and Eliyahu, tries to save him. But what is the significance of that? It seems like a private episode between Eliyahu and the widow. Why is this sort of placed at the center of a story which is supposed to be more of a national crisis? Okay, but based on what we've said, it seems we can begin to understand it, that again, part of the reason why Eliyahu was placed in this situation with the widow is not only to feed himself, but also to provide for the widow. And now when her son dies, that creates a problem for Eliyahu as well, because the whole way that he's supposed to live this year is to provide this miracle for himself, but which will also provide for her. And now that's being challenged by her son dying. Okay, and we'll see that she says that the widow will say that to Eliyahu. She holds him responsible for the death of her son. Okay, so it's all connected to this idea. But we'll discuss that more in detail next time. B'ezrat Hashem. Any questions or comments? Okay, very good. So the next, let me just stop the recording.